Live. Jen, Karen, do you guys want to? Yeah, there we go. Want to get started here? Cool.
Aaron, go for it. I've started a recording just to let everybody know, it probably just said it.
So welcome to the Women in GIS Cartography meeting. We have three wonderful guests with us today. We'll get started with them. Do you have any announcements you want to do first, Jen or Sage?
Yeah, we'll quickly run through them. Jen, do you want to talk about the Arizona chapter updates real quick?
Sure. Yeah. We have our next book club meeting coming up on the 25th. I usually host those, but this month, for scheduling snafus, Sam Denning is going to be hosting that one. And then we have Mugs and Mornings coming up for the remainder of the year and another quarterly meeting coming up next month. This quarterly meeting was kind of delayed because of a conference and stuff. And so we're kind of having back-to-back quarterly meetings, but the next one is going to be on balancing work and life. So I'm hoping you all can join us, and there is the website for the chapter. And Sage, do you want to take care of the international stuff?
Yes. And just quickly too, talking about our quarterly meeting, we're also kind of looking for people who might be passionate about talking about their work-life balance. So if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, reach out to all of us and we'll be happy to connect with you on it. So just quickly, as far as our parent organization, the Women in GIS International, there are free events. There's some monthly lightning talks that you can not only apply to do the lightning talk, but also attend. I believe this round of them, the theme is paranormal maps, which is pretty fun. So it's worthwhile checking out. There's also communities of practices. They are a bunch of different sectors of GIS world, public sector, private sector, and on from there. They happen every Wednesday. There's a bunch of different groups. It's just kind of getting together and networking. The Geography Without Borders podcast comes out every first Friday. It's on Spotify and I believe other streaming services, but I'm not 100% positive of that. And then lastly, just to point out some cool member benefits as part of being in the Women in GIS organization. You can help support your local chapter. We've got a ton of people here, and I don't know if all of you are Arizona folks, in which come and hang out with us all the time, but there's also a ton of other groups. So definitely check out the webpage to see that. We talked about the communities of practice already. It's also discounts on a bunch of professional development workshops. There's a ton of really good workshops that the parent organization puts on, and you get discounted prices to attend those. All of your work in Women on GIS counts towards your GISP points, so there's another incentive. And lastly, we have a job board that if you're a member, you have access to the job board. It's pretty cool and it's got lots of good information on it. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Karen, who is going to moderate this session.
Thank you, Sage. So we will have three presenters today. And so to let you know, we're going to you can put any questions you have in the chat. And then at the end of their presentation, we'll take those questions. And then we'll also have a short, whatever time we have left, we'll have a panel. So if you come up with questions even afterwards, you can save those for the panel. So with that, we're going to welcome our first presenter, which is Wanmei Liang. And she is a science visualizer from NASA. And she is an amazing cartographer that you may have seen some of her work with the different map challenges. I've seen them on LinkedIn and they are amazing. And welcome, Wanmei.
Thank you. I'm gonna share my screen. You can see my screen, right?
Yep. Yes.
All right. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Wanmei, and I work at NASA as a science data visualizer. I create about 120 maps for NASA Earth Observatory on topics ranging from cool places around the world that you've never heard of before, to disasters, to educating the public about science. So essentially, I am part cartographer, part reporter, part science communicator. And what you see on the slide here is a compilation of a portion of my GIS portfolio. Today, I will be talking about the campfire map that I created for the 30-day map challenge, and it's in the right box in the center of your screen. I will talk you through how I created the map, every conscious decision I made, and even a little psychology about cartography. All right, there we go. So this is the map of the 2018 campfire in Paradise, California. And this was a fun little personal map that I created for the 30-day map challenge last year. The goal of this visualization is to help people understand the scale and impact of one of the most destructive wildfires in California history and how it resulted in a significant loss of life, homes, and properties. So let's start off with the coloring of the base map or satellite imagery. There are a lot of satellite imagery of this fire processed by many people on the internet. So what makes my visualization different? The image on the top is the image used by all news agencies. You can see the drama of the smoke and some active fires in red or orange, but it gives very little value on just how devastating the fire was. So one of the challenges for this map was that I really wanted to highlight the burn intensity, the size of the fire, the path, and the danger of the fire. I didn't want to just show the smoke. Because of that, I experimented with different band combinations to find the right look that told the story I wanted to tell. In this case, I used band combination 762, which is actually used to look at geological features, but it actually worked out really nice for this map. Now that the imagery is ready to go, the first thing I noticed is that it's really flat. And so I added this multi-directional hillshade layer to give it a rugged terrain. Next, I had to make decisions on which elements I wanted to put on the map to tell my story. So the first thing I did was I overlaid a roads center line from Tiger Lines on top of the imagery for context, so map viewers can see where the city of Paradise and Concau are. Then I picked out the major roads out of the city and made those more prominent. You can probably see those flickering on your screen right now. Then I picked out the road Skyway because that was the only evacuation route in and out of the city. The other routes were closed due to smoke. The story I wanted to tell here is that the residents were really desperate to get away from this 8 miles an hour fire that was ripping through their city. If you look here, I don't know if you can see my mouse. You can, great. There is a literal fire going through the evacuation route, and that's where a lot of people lost their lives that day. What else did I want to add to my story? What about buildings? This layer was created by Microsoft with AI. This is where I encountered another challenge. It was a difficult decision on whether or not to include the buildings layer. On one hand, the buildings layer would be really beneficial because it would show where the city is, and like the roads layer, it tells an incredible story of how the active fire was going through the city. On the other hand, I didn't want to lose detail in the satellite imagery, such as these tiny spot fires right here. If I layer the buildings on top, you kind of lose that. Ultimately, I decided that the buildings is way too important to the story to not include, because the buildings really showed just how many homes and businesses were in danger. This wasn't some spread out rural community with houses miles away from each other. These people live shoulder to shoulder in a dense community, and the roads just don't showcase that as well as the buildings' footprints did. The next challenge was to find a way to symbolize this layer on a super vibrant and colorful imagery base map. So I tried different colors such as white, black, and even unconventional colors such as purple, but ultimately decided to go with yellow because it really stands out. So this is what I have so far. I exported the image and loaded it into Canva to turn this visualization into an infographic. The first thing I did was I used an old photographer's and painter's trick to lead the viewer's eyes through my image. So if I flicker between these two slides, you can see that I used a focus gradient to darken the bottom corner of the image so that the viewer's eyes goes directly to the center of the image, which is the city that's burning. After that, I added all of these other elements that you see here. But the final result being that the viewer is led through a golden ratio spiral where their eyes start at the middle of the fire right here, and then it goes around to the title so they know what this is about, go down to my name and data sources, and finally to the weather conditions. With this final product, I'm really happy with how it turned out. The fact is, I could have added hundreds of other things to the map, and it was a really conscious decision on what to add and what to leave out. And while my choices were non-standard, like the geology band combination, the ultimate deciding factor is that when people look at this for 10 seconds, I want them to understand and to take away something informative from what I'm creating without them feeling overwhelmed with the data. And now I want to do a little plug about the 30-day map challenge. For those who don't know, this happens every year in November for about the last 4 years. And this is a great time to brush up on your cartographic skills along with thousands of other cartographers. If you do have time to make maps, on my presentation slide, there are 5 tips on how to get started. If you do not have time to make maps, you can still participate in your head. And I'm going to show you how. So ask yourself these questions every time you see a map on the internet or in a magazine or wherever. The first question is, do I understand the map in 2 seconds? If you do, great, they did a good job. If you're struggling after 2 seconds to understand the map, think to yourself, what can I do to increase the understandability of the map? Does it need a title, a larger title? Or if the map is about like an animal, would it be helpful to include a picture of the animal? Would that increase understandability quicker? The second question you should ask yourself is, what do you like about the map? Consciously point out those things that you like. Maybe it's a style, a drop shadow, the colors, the fonts, the presentation. Maybe it's something that you like. Maybe include those things into your future maps. And the third question is, what do you dislike about the map? Is it because it's a personal styling preference, or is it because something is difficult to understand? Then you ask yourself, what would I do to make it better? You don't have to actually do it on GIS, but just ask yourself those questions. And the last thing is to keep a folder of map inspirations. If you see a map that you like, save it, bookmark it, save it in a folder, so you can refer back to it for inspiration when you do have the bandwidth to make a pretty map. And that's it for today. Stay mappy.
Thank you, Wanmei. That was wonderful. I love how you use the Canva. Do you usually use that for most of your projects?
Yes, I do. I've recently tried to switch over to Illustrator because it's like the industry standard. But for the most part, almost all of the maps that you've seen on my LinkedIn were created with Canva.
Does anyone have any questions they would like to ask?
There's a couple in the chat. Scrolling. So I think you said that you had used Landsat, correct?
Good question. It's either Landsat or Sentinel, one of the two.
I think I saw it in your notes in the corner.
Mhm.
Okay.
Sorry, Karen, I didn't mean to like
No, you're good.
thing. And Georgia is asking, can you say more about the Microsoft AI for the buildings? Haven't heard about that before.
Yeah, it's something that you can download on GitHub. I think they have building footprints for all 50 states and I think for other countries as well. And they're really easy to use.
So about the golden ratio, do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Um, the golden ratio is just there's a bug outside my window. Sorry. The golden ratio is just like something that designers and photographers and people in the olden day uses, and it's just a great way for viewers for you to lead the viewers straight to exactly what you want them to see on the map. That's it. And the next question, did you use Pro? I actually used QGIS for this one.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Wanmei. Does anyone else have any other questions? You can either raise your hand if you want or toss them in the chat. Someone put a
Yes,
link
thanking
to the,
Ali.
yeah, good. Right, well, thank you, Wanmei. I really appreciate that. And I hope everyone joins that 30-day challenge here in November. Be great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Anna Riling, who is our AGIC 23 Maps and Apps winner and is a cartographer and owner of Four Corners Mapping and GIS.
Hi, everyone. I am also going to be using Canva for this presentation, which I've never done before. So we'll see how it goes. Hang on one sec. Sorry.
Very good.
One more time. Okay. Look good?
Looks good.
Yes, we
Okay.
see the, yeah.
All right, cool. All right. I'm Anna Riling. I'm the owner of Four Corners Mapping and GIS based in Durango, Colorado. Today, I'd like to talk about my thought process and some methods for the cartography of my story maps.
Anna, sorry.
Yeah.
We're seeing the audience window enter full screen mode. Yeah.
Is that okay?
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah, there we go.
This is by no means a comprehensive run through, but I wanted to share a few tips and tricks that I either learned the hard way or had to teach myself along the way. I'm actually an Arizona native and went to school in Flagstaff for geology. I was a geologist for 20 years, working on gas drilling rigs, drilling rock cores, and taking water and soil samples. And working 12-hour night shifts in the middle of nowhere, catching water samples in 14 below weather was not conducive to raising a family. I wanted exit strategy out of the field and something that would let me pursue my other passion, which was maps. So I got my graduate certificate in GIS online from the University of Denver in 2013, and then eventually my master's in GIS. That was like zoop, but it took a while. I worked in environmental consulting for several years, both in GIS and as a professional geologist. I started Four Corners Mapping in 2019, and I have not looked back. I feel extremely lucky that my work now aligns so well with my personal values. I get to do the kind of work I love, and I work with the most talented and passionate people working in environmental conservation today. And I get to do projects that I have a personal connection to and that make a real difference. My cartography and design work have won several awards, including the AGIC symposium recently for the story map caught in the middle. There have been a lot of stories and story maps about the Grand Canyon, but this story had not yet been told. It's the story of a Grand Canyon with no water in it. Outdated water management, overuse, climate change, and severe drought all pose serious risks to this national treasure. This story map, produced with Environmental Defense Fund and American Rivers, was intended to tell the hidden stories of water in the canyon and what it would mean for those whose spirituality, lives, and livelihood depend on a free-flowing Colorado River. I'll drop a link to the story map in the chat at the end of the talk. So I'll reference that story map and a couple of others made by me and other talented people. So for this quick talk, I'll focus on some considerations you might want to make in terms of cartography, including the basic elements of theme like title, subtitle, fonts, and color palette. I'll also talk about how I've used and abused a few of the in-the-box story map elements and when you should step away from the web map and think about whether a static map would be better. Also, probably the least sexy topic, but critically important to your work, is citing your sources and some different ways I've used to make that process less painful. So I'll start with just a few words about the title, which may be intrinsic for a lot of people, but worth voicing. I like the title to be succinct and memorable. Having a short, catchy title makes it easier to remember and hopefully more likely for it to be shared. I think, and I hope, that the idiom-based title caught in the middle projects an image of struggle, divide, and urgency and suggests that the reader delve further. You can include more detail in the subtitle if you want, but you don't always need a subtitle. In my experience, the subtitle elaborates on the content to inform and pique interest. The story map theme ties into cartography because anything you do here has a ripple effect for all the elements in the piece, including the maps. You can and should create your own theme. Esri makes it pretty easy to do, and it will set your story map apart if done well. Does your story map occur at night? Maybe go for a dark theme. Is your story aimed at kids? Use bright colors and fun fonts. Sometimes you're bound to your client's brand kit, and to be honest, it's pretty nice because that takes one thing off your plate. A brand kit will tell you exactly what colors and fonts to use in which instance and gives examples showing how different colors and fonts contrast with different photo palettes. So speaking of palettes, get ready for a change from this beautiful Antelope Canyon image. I took this photo on a trip to the Grand Canyon that I thought would work for the theme for Caught in the Middle because of the diversity of colors. And this ended up being the cover image, I think, because of the evocative drama and beauty of the scene. I used the Coolors Extract Palette tool to select the colors I liked. And if you've used that before, tell me in the chat. I just stumbled across it. I'm sure there are many other tools, but I stumbled on this guy, Fabrizio Bianchi's work, and I haven't looked back. You can scroll through many combinations of colors that tool selects from a photo. You can increase or decrease the number of colors and then export to any number of formats. I use the hex codes exported from the tool for the story map theme. So for the story map theme, to add one or modify one, you go to Story Maps Home and select Themes. And from there, you can fine tune the colors of the background, the header, and the accents. And these are used in other elements like quote blocks and buttons. You might need to consider colorblind awareness in your selection of colors. And fortunately, a lot of really smart people are working on this and make it easy on the rest of us. These are just a handful of many tools out there to select a colorblind aware palette and visualize colors from different perspectives. Before Pro came out with those tools, I used Color Brewer a lot to help me choose my colors. Again, if you've used that, let me know. It was developed by Cynthia Brewer at Penn State. You can set the tool to only show colorblind safe colors, then choose number of classes, types of data, and export to a number of formats for design use, notably not to a Pro style, though, which is probably why Pro came out with their own version. I like all my fonts and colors to be consistent from the text in the story map to the charts, maps, animations, labels, everything. So a note on fonts. There are a ton of fonts in the Story Map platform to choose from. Well, not a ton, but there's a lot. But you can also add Google Fonts, and you can use a free online font pairing generator, which is I've used that a bunch. And think about your preference for serifs and sans serifs. I mix it up depending on the project. For Caught in the Middle, I just loved the look of Playfair display in italics, and I wanted it to figure prominently as the headings. For maps, I also switch it around depending on the project. It really depends on the look and feel you want to achieve, the emotion you want to evoke. Although I think in cartography, there's an emphasis on the font being clean and easy to read, as well as having a wide range of weights and styles. I've also made handy use of the vector tile style editor. Thank you, John Nelson, for this tip. It's amazing. You start with a stock Esri Living Atlas base map, and then you can modify anything and everything about it. And then you can save it to your ArcGIS Online content and use as a base map online or in Pro. For Caught in the Middle, I started with the modern antique base map and changed just a few things. I wanted to emphasize the administrative areas because it was the park and because there are Indian reservations around it. And I wanted the fonts and color scheme to match the theme of my story map. I also added hillshade to the modified base map, but because the Grand Canyon laughs in the face of most hillshade renderings, I had to tweak it quite a bit so it wasn't so intense. I wanted it to be a bit muted and the shadows not so dark so I could overlay other layers on top. I used some of John Nelson's techniques for hillshade blending in ArcGIS Online by applying several different raster functions and blend modes to a DEM. There are so many fun tools to play with in the Story Maps platform, and here are just a few examples, by no means comprehensive. Animations are a bit of a chunk to bite off, especially 3D animations, but if done well, you can convey a powerful message. This one was then Caught in the Middle and shows the nearly 1,800 dams on the Colorado River, with Hoover and then Glen Canyon Dam called out on the year they were constructed. You can do a more gentle fade in on the labels because they just sort of boom, pop, but it's kind of a laborious process. This animation was used on a news segment about the drop in groundwater levels in Cochise County and shows well installations since 1838. And there were many thousands. Swipe can be used on graphics, photos, and maps as long as they share the same extent and size. This swipe is from the story map Groundswell on the Rio Grande, how the people of the San Luis Valley are coming together around water. It shows the difference in agricultural patterns in the last century, which is an important part of the story around water in the Rio Grande, the San Luis Valley. San Luis Valley is near the headwaters of the Rio Grande in Colorado. Again, 3D is a little committing, but can be pretty fun to play with and also interact with as a user. This 3D scene was bookmarked to show the path of a proposed water line leading out of the San Luis Valley as the user scrolls through the sidecar text. Kind of fun. Map actions can lead the viewer to a feature of interest, but require interaction. I kind of feel like it might not be intuitive to everyone, and maybe a better workaround could be a web map zooming or panning as the user scrolls. These map actions highlight a historical acequia in the San Luis Valley, and note the configured pop-up here. And I'm not an expert, but I've definitely spent many an hour Googling arcade expressions to bend pop-ups to my will. Legends don't always have to live in a web map or a static map. Here I pulled the legend out of the static map by exporting it as a graphic in Pro, then fiddling with the individual graphics. Then I exported it as a PNG, so it had a transparent background, and then put it in the sidecar as an image. So this leads me to a pretty sticky point, to web map or not to web map. There's starting to be a trend towards not making absolutely everything interactive in story maps. After all, you're telling the story. There are ways to be low-tech interactive and produce a beautiful product without having the user wait endless seconds for a web map to load. For the first slide and caught in the middle, I used a static map overlaid onto a beautiful photo of the Colorado River in the Grand Canyon taken by Amy Martin. I started with the untouched photo, then blurred it radially with a focus on the river. And as the user scrolls, the map resolves and the sidecar text boxes slide up. This was all done in Pro, sort of, with several different exports at the same extent, size, and resolution. The blurring was done in another program. I did use a web map for the Trends in April snowpack map, but I exported the EPA data and created a separate feature layer hosted on the American Rivers ArcGIS Online organizational account. That way I could change the colors to match my theme, customize the pop-ups, and have control over hosting of the data. I found that wherever possible, it's best to use data hosted by you or your client. This isn't possible in all cases, but for simple feature layers, try to find a way to get a hold of the data and make your own version. So there's a tendency for story map authors to incorporate a lot of interactive elements. And I think this is changing as more people are realizing the benefits and beauty of using static maps in creative ways in a story map. And here are some examples. This is an animation of the tornado occurrence and intensity from the story map Tornado Migration by John Nelson. I just love watching it. And here's a clip of a series of static maps beautifully illustrating tree cover and other characteristics across the globe in the story map, A World of Forests by the Esri Story Maps team. The point being, there's more than one way to skin a cat, and the level of interactivity depends on your style, your project, and your goals. So last but not least, my sources. My worst nightmare is getting an email from someone asking about my source for a map I produced years back for which I did not document my sources. I'm hyper diligent to the point of being annoying about recording where the spatial data and audio and visual media come from. It's respectful to the author of the data. You're required to abide by copyright restrictions, and it just makes sense. If you can't tell someone where your data came from that you used in an analysis, you might as well just do it all over again. I'll create metadata if I'm required by the terms or nature of the project, but to be honest, sometimes I create multiple versions of my data and I just forget to do it for each one. I'm sure you all have many other, probably better ways of documenting your spatial data sources, but the easiest and quickest I found is just recording them for each project in a Google Sheet. This is kind of embarrassing. I mean, I'm sure there's a much better way to do it, but I have fields for layer, source, date, and so on. For citing sources for text and other media, I use Zotero. It's an open source reference management software. I've been using it since grad school. It's amazing. I love it. It has a Microsoft Word and Google Sheet plugin, so you can cite sources from within your outline or narrative document, and then export a bibliography to any number of formats. You can also create a group, so if you're working with a team, you can add references to the same library in real time. In terms of ways to cite sources in the story map, I use links in photos and sometimes in the narrative. I prefer not to have a bunch of links for people to be able to click out and exit the story map. A bibliography can be exported and then pasted into the sources section at the end, and you can just be done with it. You can manually add footnotes to your narrative or media elements as numbers and parentheses, but you'd have to keep track of which number belongs to which citation and then record it in your sources section. And I've never done this because I don't have time for manual entry. Kind of the same thing with, there's a really nice credits section at the bottom of story maps, but I've never really used it for sources because it requires manual entry. The method I use most often is to export my bibliography and then paste it into its own sources section at the end. It's easy and fast, and then you can update it if you need to. Here are some of those ways that I've used that credits section without credits. But you do you. So to sum up, these are just some of the things I've picked up along the way. Others might disagree or have different approaches, and that's really the wonderful thing about cartography and story maps. I gain inspiration every day from the works of others, and I wouldn't be here if I didn't. I hope this was informative and useful, and thank you for watching, and thank you Women in GIS Arizona chapter for having me. Sorry I went over.
Thank you so much, Anna. Appreciate it. You got a lot of people who reacted great to your coolers and to Color Brewer. So I know a lot of people out there like it or will be using it. So the first question I have, let's see, is Sage. She said, I always struggle trying to figure out where to use the swipe so it is meaningful. Do you have any tips on using the swipe in the story map effectively like you did in this one?
So for Caught in the Middle, we went back and forth a lot about trying to do a visualization of what the river, what the canyon and the river would look like with only 1,000 CFS or less in it. And we ended up getting an illustrator to produce these really amazing illustrations. And we just gave him a photo of, in one case, Ninkoweap, the really famous long stretch right before the Little Colorado River with the granaries on the right. And he did illustration based on that photo, and then you could swipe. So his version was a canyon without water, and then you could swipe back and forth. I've used it for photos for like I found my client took a picture of Lone Rock in Lake Powell without water, I think, and then I found a picture of Lone Rock at Lake Powell with water, and I was able to crop laboriously and do the swipe so you could see what it looked like with and without water. Yeah, there's just a couple of examples.
That's great. There was also comments on your 2-week photo where you did the map drape over.
I'm sorry, what?
Where you do the map drape over with the photo. We had the one with the 2-week, and I think there was another one you did well as well. That was great. I think a lot of people commented on that, and I thought that was really impressive as well. Do you know what we're talking about, Anna?
No.
So you know how you put the map on top of the photo you've taken of the same area, so it's like has this photo behind, and then you have this transparency so you can see through the map on that location. I really liked that as well, so I wanted to point that out to you.
Yeah, I really love that technique, and I actually was inspired by the OARS catalog, the river rafting catalog. If you guys haven't got it, it's free. Just request it; they'll send it to you. It's just you can use it to pick out which rafting trips you want to go on, and also the maps are incredible.
That's awesome. Georgia had a question. She said she missed the part about the transparent legend that you exported as a PNG question. Can you go back over how you did the transparent legends?
Yeah. So let me just see if I can bring it up while I'm talking.
Thank you.
So I just create the legend in Pro, and then you can convert it to a graphic and then manipulate those those graphic elements. So you can resize and move them around, separate them, and then you can group them and then export it as a PNG. And that's what I did. I mean, you don't have to use Pro either. You could use any graphic design software to do a custom legend.
Did that help, Georgia? Go ahead and go off mic if you needed anything else. Okay, good.
Okay.
All right. And then we had a whole bunch more thank yous and that they loved your color palette extraction idea. I did think that that was really cool. I did love that. So anyone wants to raise their hand or come off mic for any other questions, you're welcome to.
So Georgia also had I just wanted to address Georgia's comments about the swipe thing. You do have to make sure that the image sizes match. And that's kind of, if they don't match, then things get kind of wonky. You can also fit or fill, and you can fiddle with those settings too. But also what looks great on a desktop might not look great on a mobile phone, because you get, you're swiping on a 3-inch screen. So yeah.
So how do you handle that for the mobile with a swipe? I guess I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, there's not much area to see the change.
Yeah, I used to have a sort of a disclaimer, I guess, at the beginning of Caught in the Middle and Groundswell, that said, for the most beautiful and satisfying experience, we recommend viewing this story on a desktop computer instead of a mobile phone. But then I started getting afraid that would turn people away, and they actually wouldn't, people just view things on their mobile phone so much, and they wouldn't actually even look at the story map. So I removed it. And I don't know, it's always an issue, whether you're doing web experience builder, whether you're doing instant apps, whether you're doing a story map, the difference between a mobile and a desktop. I mean, some projects I've created a mobile app and a desktop app, it's always an issue.
Rachel had a little something to add. She wanted to know if it's possible to set up the swipe to go up, down on mobile and side to side on a larger screen.
Ooh, you should definitely send that to the story maps team.
That would be good.
Because I've tried to rotate my phone, but it just wreaks havoc, and then I'm like lost in the story map.
The next question is, how did you create the transparent feature map?
Like, let me remember. So that was in Pro, and
I agree, it is really cool.
Like this one. So that's a photo that I got on Unsplash, I think. I don't know, it's cited in the story map. And then I used Photor, which is a free online photo editing software platform, to do this radial blur technique, because I wanted the river to remain in focus, but I wanted everything else to be fuzzy so that when I overlaid my map elements, you could see them. So that's what I started with. And then I sort of hacked this a little bit. You can add the image to Pro. And you don't have to. You could actually create the map in Pro and then just overlay that on an image in a graphic design software. But I just created this, the map elements in Pro, and then exported as a PNG with a transparent background. And then, yeah. So to get the transition from photo to map, I just have the photo, and as you're scrolling, the next slide is the photo with the map. Does that answer the question?
Sarmista, did that help? Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Awesome. Anything else?
I am planning on developing a workshop for story maps. And it's just one of those back burner projects. So if anyone's interested, just send me an email.
I know I'm definitely interested. Yours are very good. And I find it, I've always been one to kind of like the data first. So jumping just to a static map and a web format is, I think that probably is a better way of doing things. So
I'm going to drop the URL for the Caught in the Middle
thank you.
Story map there. And then I'll bring my last slide up, and then I'll leave. I'll leave this party.
Thank you so much, Anna.
Okay, so there's my contact information. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Our next presenter is our last presenter today, and it is the Iron Cartographer for our AGIC 23. It's Garrett Raubinger. I hope I said that right. I was
No, yeah, you got it right.
sorry. And he is a GIS specialist for the Maricopa County Assessor's Office. Welcome, Garrett.
Yes. All right, and let me just get a few things set up here first. My screen shared. Right, minimize that. All right. So, I made this presentation and then I started going over it yesterday and I realized I got very ambitious and was going over my time. So, this is more of a condensed version. However, I'm pasting a link in the chat to my full version of the slides. I also have a whole bunch of hyperlinks and resources in this PowerPoint that I'm going to mention, links to tutorials and other people's blogs and websites. There's a lot of really good material and resources that you can access through this link. So I'm just going to drop this in the chat, and that just leads to a OneDrive. It should be open to everyone who has the link. And everyone can see my title screen on my slide, correct? No?
I think you need to share your screen.
Is it not sharing? Oh,
No.
share. Working now.
There you go.
Okay, cool. Perfect. All right, so we're going to talk about cartography and the blend of art and science. And as Karen said, my name is Garrett Raubinger. Got to click in here. So a little bit about me. I graduated from Northern Michigan University, a bachelor's of science in geomatics, which is basically just how Canadians say GIS. We're that close to the border, I guess. And I have just over 5 years of professional GIS experience, and I'm also a specialist in the assessor's office. And here's the Iron Cartographer map that I did, and that was a competition at AGIC where we had to complete a bicycle race map in 90 minutes. And then I also won in the general best in cartography at the conference as well with this North American desert climates map as well. I also enjoy just various things like backpacking and watching basketball, making maps and strategy games and stuff like that. So today I'm going to talk about hillshades and cartographic inspiration. I was going to talk about layouts, but that's what I decided to cut. But if you go to that slideshow in the link, I have a bunch of resources talking about north arrows, neat lines, balancing your layouts, and different techniques on how to kind of break some of those rules or just utilize them. So go ahead and take a look at those if you're so inclined. So starting out, we'll talk about hillshades. And hillshades originally were done in this old school kind of analog way where they hand shaded all of the relief of their terrain. One of the pioneers or one of the best people that ever kind of do it was Edward Imhoff, and he was a Swiss cartographer. These people, and typically relief shaders, were also painters by trade as well. And this helped with color theory and having a design first mindset, as well as understanding the concept of shade and light and illumination. Some special types or things that they would do to really add effect and contrast and context to their hillshades. They would add tints and colors to produce these atmospheric effects that help simulate the terrain from above. And there's different ways you can do this, but I recommend, and this is something I like to do when doing hillshade, is I like adding tints to it, is I like to sample colors from the region, from imagery of the place that I'm actually mapping out. So you can get the greens of the low valleys and the whites of the browns of the high mountaintops and ridges, and kind of have a more realistic color palette that matches your region. And kind of in the modern day, in lieu of kind of refining these hand-drawn techniques, we can draw inspiration and combine these with our new technological capabilities. Here's a tutorial where you can isolate certain elevations of your hillshade to add more transparent whites and blues to give you more of an atmospheric effect, or give you a fog effect within your terrain. And then here's also a tutorial to Sarah Bell, who works for Esri. And this is how to basically hand draw and hand shade hill shading. And this is a good exercise to kind of help you grasp the understanding of how shading works within a hill shading context. And here's just kind of a close-up of what a hand-drawn hillshade looks like. And in this instance, this is by Edward Imhoff, and a few characteristics. We have the shading or the light illumination sources coming from the top left of the page. And that's kind of a key characteristic of most hillshades. So some science behind hillshades and how they work, especially within GIS. is there's this fun law called the law of cosine emissions, and this is used to measure the brightness of reflected light off of an object. And so there are two vectors that are measured to help get this law or this equation. There's surface normal vectors and light vectors. And our light vectors are perpendicular to our surface, or 90 degrees. And our light vectors are just the illumination angle, or the angle in which our light is shining on the object. So if you look at the diagram on the right, if we look at point A, this is on a flat surface. And so the surface normal vector is pointing straight up in the air. But if we then look at point B, which is on a slope surface, more like a 45-degree angle, the surface normal vector is kind of pointing more diagonally out, but it's still perpendicular to the surface where point B is on. Then you get the light vector, and then you measure the angular distance between both of those vectors, and you get a value, which then you calculate the cosine of. And that result, when you calculate the cosine, gives you a value between 1 and 0. And 0 is typically dark and 1 is light. And then when you run this through in, say, ArcGIS Pro, for example, and their Hillshade tool, this divides all those values by 255 to give you a range of very precise, unique values to add a specific tint or light or illumination to your hillshade. And then if we start to look on the other side of the mountain, where the illumination angle would start to shade this mountain, the angle between the illumination or the light vectors and the surface normal vectors is greater than 90 degrees. And so then this produces a negative value, which then the computer knows to cast shade and cast darkness on that side of the mountain. So that's kind of a very brief overview on kind of how hill shading works, especially from a science and technological standpoint. So kind of the elements within a hillshade, there's three. We have the zenith or elevation, the azimuth, and exaggeration. So the zenith would be basically the angle in which the light source is shining down upon the object, or in this case, like our previous example, the illumination angle. And so a way you can also imagine this, if you lay a map flat on a table, if you were shining a flashlight directly overhead, that would be a 90-degree illumination angle, and that would simulate the sun at high noon. But that would also wash out a lot of your features and terrain and kind of make things look a little fuzzy. And then if you were to kind of do the exact opposite and shine that flashlight from the side of the table at the map, then you're going to have, that's a 0-degree illumination angle, and you're going to have really dramatic and drastic shadows cast across your map. The next element would be the azimuth, or the bearing in which the light is shined upon your object. The default with an ArcGIS Pro is 315 degrees, which is a northwesterly angle. However, studies within like the last 3 to 4 years have shown like the best angle, and they sourced this from different focus groups and asked a bunch of lay people through surveys. The best angle is 337.5. It's very technical, but I thought that was interesting. But the ideal range typically to have your hillshade cast upon is 0 degrees, or the top of your page, to 300 degrees, kind of in the northwesterly region. There's different effects you can kind of get when you mess with the azimuth. Though, if you were to shine or have your light source come from the southeasterly quarter of your map, so if you look at this figure down here, if you choose 157 degrees, it can actually invert what terrain features look like. So ridges can look like canyons and vice versa. And so this can actually, really hurt what you're trying to convey on your map. So if you look closely, like A, B, and C are along a canyon or a valley here, and then right over here, then A, B, and C kind of look like it's actually at the top of a ridge, but that's because they kind of flipped around the light source. But ways you can combat that, if you're kind of messing with different angles and you have this illusion happening, is you can start to add tints and different geographic data to kind of add context, so the viewer is more able to discern what's a valley and what's the top of a mountain. And then finally, the last effect is exaggeration. And this is just at kind of multiplying the values or the Z values by any sort of factor, by 2, by 5, by 10. And it can make terrain look more rugged and look more drastic. Some similar effects that you can kind of blend in with hillshade or do in lieu of hill shading. One of them is the plans oblique method. And what this does is shift your viewing frame above the mapped area, so the terrain is kind of viewed in an oblique angle, and it produces a 3D effect without even going 3D. And so kind of some diagrams to highlight this. Here is what we typically, when we're making a map, we make this in an orthographic sense, where the image plane is directly above the terrain that we're mapping. However, when we run it through plans oblique, it shifts that map frame back. So then these the vectors are then shown at an angle, thus making these slopes a lot more taller and flatter, and then making the slopes facing away from you a lot steeper looking. This produces a pseudo 3D effect. And then on the far right, we have, this is what 3D would actually be, where you have full control of the image plane moving across the dimensions, whereas plans oblique just moves laterally above the terrain. And so on the far right here, we have a map by Xaver Imfeld from the 1880s, and it's a hill shaded map of central Switzerland. The Swiss really liked hill shading because of the Alps, I presume. And this is a really fascinating map when you take a look at it, because then you start to realize it's breaking a rule of hill shading, where the illumination angle is coming from the southeastern portion of the map. And he also utilizes plans oblique, where the slopes that are facing you are way flatter looking, whereas the slope or facing towards you are flatter looking, whereas the slopes facing away from you are way steeper, and they're shaded. So a lot of people asked him this question: why would you illuminate at this weird angle? He said that this map was actually placed along a trail in Switzerland, and it was a panoramic map. So you would look at the map and then see all those features that are on the map right in front of you. And he said the majority of the people, when they approached this map along the trail or along the road, came from the bottom right angle. And so if we actually twist this map, then the faces of the mountains that these people are approaching and viewing this map from are now illuminated towards the viewer. And then if they were to then look up from the map and look out at the mountains in front of them, the slopes that they see in front of them are illuminated on the map, and the slopes that they don't see or that are facing away from them are shaded. And so they don't really care about what they don't see in this instance, but they care about what they do see on the slopes that are facing them. And this also can help illuminate the labels and other geographic features that they can see right in front of them, as well as on the map. Oh, and then just to go back to that really quick, plans oblique was also used to help map out plate tectonics and the topography of the ocean floor. And then in the middle here, we have an example of a regular hillshade, and then plans oblique of the exact same region. And you can kind of see where certain areas are exaggerated and made to look more steep that are facing away from the plane that the map is looking at. Another effect, which is pretty much just hill shading, but it does a lot of work for you, is multi-directional hill shading. And this combines hill shades at different azimuths and different angles to get more of those details and nuances of your terrain. Because oftentimes, if you have a feature of your terrain or a mountain that's being hidden in shadow, the viewer might not be able to see it. And depending on what you're mapping, you might want your viewer to see certain aspects of your terrain. It's really good in a pinch. However, it's less customizable if you were to do a bunch of hill shades yourself at different angles and then utilize blend modes to kind of craft your own multi-directional hill shade. So here's a kind of a quick example. Here's a hill shade, the basic 315-degree azimuth, and then multi-directional kind of helps with illumination, especially at the top of mountains and ridges. It also prevents a lot of the washout and shadows from hiding features within canyons and valleys. And to access multi-directional hillshade in Pro, you just kind of go to your hillshade tab and you can drop down hillshade type to multi-directional. Some additional considerations would be the geographic or terrain context. So if you're using a super high resolution DEM and then you're mapping at a small scale or like a continental scale, oftentimes your terrain can then look really wrinkly and dark, and it can really contrast a little too harshly with all the other data that's on your map. So it would be wise to either run it through some statistics to kind of blur that data a little more, or to find a DEM of lower resolution. And also vice versa. Sometimes you don't want a DEM of really poor resolution if you're mapping a large scale area, then you get really chunky and boxy looking hill shades. And then I did mention these blend modes, and here's a link to the documentation of those that gives you the formulas of how the raster blend modes work in Pro, as well as a more detailed account of what each one does when you blend certain rasters and colors together. For the sake of time, I won't click on the link, but you can access it later. And then going to transition into some inspirations, ideas, and concepts. Get a sip here really quick. All right. So first off, I like to implement some design practices within my process of creating a map. And I picked these up from taking graphic design in college. And I really like to utilize thumbnails and hand sketching my maps, especially different symbologies and features that I might want to include or test out in the computer. Hand sketching really kind of helps you that planning process and go through many of ideas, as opposed to like sitting there on Pro and making 5 different maps with 5 different iterations. That takes a whole bunch of time, and you end up only choosing one and scrapping 4. If you were to get all your ideas sketched out on a piece of paper, then it's much easier for you to kind of see which layout works better, how things can be balanced, what elements you might or might not want in the map. And like this picture on the far right was actually some of the notes and thumbnails I did before the Iron Cartographer as some planning. I was sketching out thumbnails that I didn't want to be sitting there in a timed 90-minute competition trying to figure out, okay, what elements of my layout do I want? I wanted to have everything in front of me. I wanted to iterate through a whole bunch of ideas, landscape, portrait at different angles, and then I also wrote out my process so then I could help, stay on task so I didn't get distracted and get lost in the sauce, if you will. You can also, I recommend taking any sort of graphic design courses. These basic techniques are the first step to having design-centered mindsets. And Anna pointed this out previously too, but I really recommend the Color Brewer and considering colorblind accessibility with color palettes in your map. Around 10% of people in the world are colorblind. That's a significant portion of the population. And then, yeah, as I said previously, map out your workflow and create your process. A repeatable process streamlines efficiency. So here are some pages from the book Cartography by Ken Fields. And here we have like kind of a conceptualization of what a general workflow might look like. And this is kind of a repeatable process. It's like one of those spirals that can go on and on. And then on the right here, we also have some QC questions to ask yourself before, during, and after while making your map or critiquing someone else's map. They ask questions like, what's the rationale for the map? Does the page look balanced? Are titles and subtitles relevant? Is the scale appropriate? Et cetera, et cetera. It really helps you audit your map and make sure you have all the elements you want, and then also helps you justify what is and what isn't on your map. In this instance, limitation produces creativity when it comes to GIS. There's a lot of licenses, programs, and softwares that that can help with your design process, but at the end of the day, there's also a lot of free and open source solutions as well. So GIS is a way of thinking. It's not an Esri product. So don't get yourself locked up if you can't afford a personal license or if you can't afford Adobe. There are a bunch of different ways to skin a cat and make sure that you can create beautiful maps in many different programs. Modern day cartographers, we can't limit ourselves to one program or remote development. We always have to consider our audience and the message that we want to tell, whether it be like an interactive map or a static map, or there's varying products and different features that we might want to include or exclude. It's always good to diversify your skill set and be confident in your ability to adapt and learn. Outsource and collaborate with other cartographers and GIS professionals and teach other people what you know, and be willing to be taught as well. Collaborate with people outside of the industry as well, with illustrators and graphic designers as well. It can really add extra elements to your maps that really pop. Diversify your critics, and always have people look at your map and ask questions, and consider viewpoints from minorities and non-Western perspectives or people that aren't within your sphere. It can really add different perspectives and ask questions that you might not have considered. Always critique your own way of thinking and what you think you know about the world. Some sources of inspiration. I kind of like to go by the mantra of mapping what's old is new. Whenever I get into a rut, I always just like to go back and reproduce old map effects and symbology, or go back and look at old maps. And what if I were to recreate this with newer data, more updated data? Like, what's changed? If you were to get like a precipitation map from 1930, what if you were to get the exact same type of data but of today, and then make the same map? Like, what kind of things could you see the difference between there? Or you can even get the design inspiration from how the symbols are made and how the layout is made, or even a projection. When it comes to base maps, I encourage you to make your own. This can kind of build familiarity with the area that you're mapping and help reduce mistakes. It's more original than kind of just using a base map that's already there for you. And I encourage to reject default settings. I cringe when I see things in like default fonts like Arial or Times New Roman. Like, there are hundreds of fonts in all these programs that can convey your message and add to your theme. And I think when you get past the defaults, you're really saying this map is mine. And I'll also point out the vector tile base map editor. There's various different tutorials on there, and you can mess around with the JSON files of the existing base maps in Esri to kind of take some of their data and make your own base maps as well. And I pulled this example from a National Geographic style map on the right to kind of talk about what's old is new. So this banding around the borders in Nat Geo maps was kind of a practice in the 30s and 40s when they're still printing black and white maps. So they would print out a black and white map, and then they would have their cartographers come in with watercolor paint brushes and then paint a ribbon around the borders of all of the countries or state regions. And this was kind of just to help the maps pop and add color in a time when color printing was expensive. But now this is kind of just a design element and practice that still carries over in National Geographic's maps today. And this is a fun feature that I like to recreate in Pro, and you can use that in the symbology pane with the donut feature, I believe. When it comes to making maps, don't be afraid to break rules and don't be afraid to make bad maps. Always ask for critique from professionals, but also from lay people. You want your maps to be consumable by both people who kind of know geography, but you also want your maps to be understood by people of the general public. You don't want your maps to seem too highbrow or too above a certain people's education levels, if you will. Constantly question and critique your own maps. Questions like, why not just do this or why not just do that? If you think things become overcomplicated, it really helps simplify your message. What if I added data sets to this? Data set X or Y? What happens when I do that? What changes about the map? Does it tell a completely different story? And then also consider who or what you are including or excluding, and why are you including or excluding that? I mean, cartography is almost the art of omitting. There's always something we're not including on the map. We're not mapping reality. We're mapping the cartographer's reality that he wants to show you, or they want to show you. So some recommended resources I want to get into really quick. This is a book I pulled some of these pages from, Cartography by Ken Fields. And then these two books are really design heavy and focus more on specific techniques within ArcGIS Pro, and then even linking Adobe Creative Cloud with it to really spruce up your design. And then also, How to Lie with Maps is a really good map to kind of understand different elements of cartography and ethics and things that you're including or excluding on maps, and different features within layouts with projections and north arrows and everything. Some websites. I recommend Shaded Relief for hill shading needs. There's a lot of cutting edge research and articles and tutorials on there to help making robust and really cool hill shades. And then also to look at a repository of old maps, I recommend the Dave Rumsey Map Collection. And this is a website. You can just search Dave Rumsey, Rumsey. And it's over 120,000 maps from the 1500s to modern day scanned in this guy's digital library. And you can scroll through and just look at all the maps, and you can export them geo-reference, so you can throw them right into your GIS software. And you can really utilize these old maps to get inspiration for whether you want to up your symbology game or get an idea for a new map you want to create, or as I said, like recreate an old map in a new way. I highly recommend Dave Rumsey's map collection. You can easily spend hours just browsing all the maps on this website. And then finally, kind of for some more technical stuff, I recommend John Nelson's YouTube channel. This is way more technical and oriented towards Esri products, ArcGIS Pro and ArcGIS Online. These are really good to kind of help you understand where certain tools are in Pro and how to make certain features in a cartographic context. However, whenever he comes out with a video, I feel like there's always an influx of maps that are directly like making the exact same map that he makes in the video, which is great and all. I think it's great at the end of the day that people are making maps. However, I think of kind of cartography and GIS like as a recipe. Like copying is fine and it's good for technique in a way, but it's not that fun. It's not that recipe. You know, it's not your own. Like add your own ingredients and spices, or in our instance, like data and design elements to make it your own. Like add some spice to that roast beef recipe, if you will. And then some other things, finally, there's the Cartography MOOC that's put on by Esri. And this one there's one happening this spring. It's a 6-week, massively open online course. That's what MOOC stands for. And it's this large class that you can take with a bunch of the Esri professionals that really give you some exercises and data to really help make maps and really up your cartography game. And then finally, I recommend the open source journal, Cartographic Perspectives. This is an open journal, so it's not behind an academic paywall or anything, but there's a lot of just great articles on cutting edge research and techniques in cartography and cartographic science as well. So as I'm starting to conclude, I just would like to implore everyone kind of within our like cartography field, we always need to share our maps, our ideas, our codes, our workflow, our data, share it with everybody because sharing just kind of helps everyone at the end. What's the point of creating maps and figures if we don't share what we learned in the world? We owe it to future generations to openly share our discoveries, especially with certain issues of climate change, social justice and equity issues, and natural resource management. We've learned and know too much about the Earth as GIS professionals not to allow our voice and perspective to play a key role in how the world moves forward. So thank you. And here's some links. You can reach out to me, LinkedIn, Instagram, I have a portfolio, and here's my email as well.
Thank you so much, Garrett. I'm going to start with the file didn't get uploaded. We don't see it. If you
It did not?
wouldn't
Okay.
mind.
I will.
At least I don't know how to
that.
see it. If someone does see it, speak up, but I don't see it anywhere. So I'll start with that.
I'll get into that.
Up. And we had quite a few questions, so I'm getting up to the top. So someone else put in so Anna put in the link to the Plan Oblique in Pro tutorial from John Nelson. So just point that out to everyone. And then while you're getting that file, I'll also mention that Jen said that the Fibonacci spiral was twice in one meeting. So that is really cool. You guys both used that. So are you ready for a question, Garrett? I don't know if you're.
Yep, I realized I direct message the link.
I
didn't send it to everyone. So
that's
the problem. There we go. Now it should be in the chat. All right.
All right. Thank you. Sarmitha asked if you could please provide some of the sources for the optimal azimuth defaults of 337.5 degrees.
Yes, so that's at the very end of I had that cited very end of my presentation. Okay. I might have to I could reshare here. Oh no, my screen's freaking out. But it was done by I'll see if I can get this back up. Here we go. I properly cited it here. It's in the Journal of Cartography and Geographic Information Science, 2016. I believe these were researchers at a university in Switzerland. Julien Biland and Koltek and Arzu. So yes, this is very interesting.
Perfect. I think she jumped off, so I'm sure that'll work good for her. Let's see here. Let me scroll back down. Allie wanted to note that those watercolors that for the boundaries, I believe that's what you're referring to. What they call them tint bands. So from the National Geographic Cartographer. And Jen also provided a link for David Rumsey, and a whole bunch of. Georgia mentioned that there's a lot of great events through the Rumsey Map Center. Does anyone know how to get on their mailing list? She mentioned that maybe it was Stanford.
I think it is done through Stanford, yes.
It's done through Stanford. Okay. Scroll. And let's see, a whole bunch of excitement about the MOOC. And that is the reference. Trying to see if there's anything else in here. Let me see if I can use the link. Someone.
Yeah, it's a little hefty, so it might take a few seconds to load, but yeah, just bear with it for a few minutes, and it should load completely.
Yeah, I was able to get in, so if you still have issues, let us know.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any other questions for Garrett? Did I miss anything? I know I learned a ton from you, Garrett. It was wonderful, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now we'll jump over to, we'll wrap up for the last few minutes with a panel discussion. So it looks like Wanmei and Anna both came back on for the video. I'll kick it off, but I'd love if everyone would put in some questions that you have. Let's see. Yeah, it looks like everyone got to your link now.
Cool.
So I'm going to touch on first. I have a question, and I know Garrett, you touched on it a little bit. That's why I want to bring it up to the panel. I want to know if all of you have formal art training. I know, Garrett, you said that you did some graphic design classes, because I feel like a lot of the same principles are used both in cartography as well as art. And okay, and if you have any, what do you feel like that combination is, the overlap? Is it something that we should all take some art classes and get some of that formal training?
Yeah, I'll continue off of that. Yeah, I highly recommend taking like any sort of like graphic design or even illustrating type courses. They can really help kind of train you, have like the designer's eye, and help understand use of negative space, and especially like the ideas of balance when it comes to like your map layouts and how your maps are laid and balanced. As I used to also do some photography as well, and I feel like that also kind of helped in the realm of being able to kind of where things are in the frame, and the rule of thirds, and also the golden ratio that Wanmei mentioned as well is utilized in photography and design.
I don't at all. I'm entirely self-taught along the way. But I have taken a bunch of, online courses and that kind of thing. But I come from a science background as a geologist, so I whenever I run up against a design question, I do some digging. And like Garrett said, I have loads of coffee table books that I can both just beautiful maps, but then also like Ken Field's cartography book and other textbooks that I can reference for cartographic design. Yeah.
And for me, I did take some art classes when I was a child. But surprisingly, you know how a lot of people say that they've always enjoyed National Geographic maps? I actually never noticed the maps when I was a child. I would be reading the articles or looking at the pictures, but the maps were never something that I like paid attention to until I got into GIS and cartography, and then it's like the best thing in the world.
That's very interesting. Thank you, guys. Georgia had a question. What computer programs do you use for the bulk of your design work? Anna, do you want to take that one first?
It really depends on the project. Obviously for spatial analysis, I'll use ArcGIS suite of products. But one of my recent projects was a pirate map, treasure hunt map that I made for a local sort of artist collective, and they have a monthly sort of bazaar. And I made this. It was a pirate theme, and so I made this map with the intention of people going around looking at this map and trying to find the clues, and then finding the prize at the end. And it was so much fun and so cool. But because it was a pirate map, I just didn't even want to deal with like the restrictions in Pro, and so I exported my shapefiles that I needed into Photoshop and then did everything in Photoshop. I made a little map flipbook, like an animated flipbook in Procreate. It really just depends on the project. I'm taking a Procreate class now to get better at painting so that I can be more artistic with my maps.
Garrett, do you use anything else?
Yeah, I use ArcGIS Pro a lot for kind of the design elements of my map. I think it's the last few years, especially the design side of ArcGIS Pro has really, really improved. Like kind of back in the days of ArcMap, it was pretty limited. In the early days of Pro, it was. But now I feel like you can do like 75-80% of design elements you could in Illustrator or Photoshop in Pro now. But there's still like that little bit of like kind of refined items that you might need a program from Adobe for. I used to use Adobe, but it's very, very expensive. So I currently don't use it. I kind of just do all my design stuff in Pro.
And for me, I do the bare minimum of the map in Arc Pro or QGIS, and then I export that as a transparent layer, put that into Canva, and then do everything else in Canva. Or Illustrator, or whatever you like to use.
I love it. The next question is, what's the best possible way to make rings maps? Because ArcGIS and QGIS doesn't have much options to map that beautifully. Does anyone want to take the lead on this?
Rings maps. What does that mean?
Like
Okay.
distance from city centers?
Salman, do you want to jump on and explain rings map? Because I'm not sure either. Which is probably why I don't know the best possible way. We'll come back. Salman, are you there? It's presenting separate time series data for different features. Okay. So I'm guessing, so you have two different features that you want to show time features on, but is it within the same map then? With different times? Separate time series and separate features?
I'm just gonna Google it.
Yeah. Like this. See, looks like there's a link here. Oh, I see. Have
Also,
either
like radial visualization.
So have any three of you ever made these types of maps and had good luck?
I haven't. That's cool though.
Yeah, I
If
say
an-
when it comes to design things in Pro, if there's no automatic way of doing it, then if you want to still stick in ArcGIS Pro, even though it's tedious, I recommend converting to graphics and just manually kind of placing things in the way you want them and orienting the way you want them. Oftentimes, yeah, you might not find the tool, but there are manual ways to do it. It's just very tedious.
Thanks, you guys. Bye.
I've actually, so I've had questions before like this where I'm like, how in the heck did they do this? And I'll find out who did it and I'll just call them and I'll just ask them. I did that with Tom Patterson. I called him and we had an hour-long conversation because I just wanted to know how he did his 3D oblique panoramic maps and what software he used and what his workflow was. And yeah, I think we're all a pretty friendly group, you know, and we're all very, very willing to share, you know, our workflows.
I have one last question here. Is it more challenging to cartographically beautify a time series map than it is for static maps? See, I know, Anna, you kind of showed some time series maps where you showed the temporal data at least going through.
Oh, in ArcGIS Pro, it's more challenging because it's just laborious in Pro. You have to deal with the range and the time series and all the settings. And I like every time's my first time, you know, until I figure it out. But it's definitely worth exploring because you can do some really powerful visuals with the time-based animations.
Yeah, I think they are very powerful, but I would say they're very hard. It's
Yeah,
like a
I
whole
mean,
bunch of little maps to put together in one.
Yeah,
So.
I just learned it the hard way. Let's just put it that way. You know, I was like, oh, reference scale. Now I know what a reference scale is, you know.
Garrett or Wanmei, do you have anything to add to time series maps?
Yeah, I do. I find temporal data very hard to wrangle. I often, if I can avoid kind of doing a kind of a dynamic or flowing map, I will. I kind of enjoy making separate maps at intervals to kind of display data over time. It's kind of a simpler way to do it, but it might not fit every situation as well. And there's also different ways to visualize temporal data. You can throw it on a graph and put those types of data visualizations with a map as well. Like I did with my deserts map that I submitted to AGIC. I had some climate data that I wanted to kind of show, but that had a temporal aspect. So I decided to make a double y-axis graph and then kind of associate each of those with each desert. And that was kind of a use of temporal data, but using a static element.
I love it. Well, thank you, everyone. We are at time, so I want to thank you, all three of you. It was wonderful. I learned a ton on cartography. You've all had so much to add, so thank you so much for coming today and presenting. You got lots of kudos in the chat for all your presentations, and I will send it over to Sage and Jen to wrap it up.
Thank you for
Yeah,
having
thank you so much. Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much, guys. This has been a really cool panel and a really awesome group of presentations. We really appreciate you all being willing to come and do this. And thank you, everybody, for coming. This has been a really well-attended, really active meeting. So please stay in tune with what our Arizona chapter of Women in GIS is doing, as well as the international chapter. I don't think we said this. Jen and I are the chapter leads for Arizona. Karen is also involved in our leadership with planning and helping us not be hot messes with these meetings. So feel free to reach out to anyone here, and obviously to myself, Jen, or Karen with any questions. Jen, did I miss anything?
No, I think you got it all. This was just wonderful, guys. I want to do a deep dive with each of you. Next time I'm
Yes.
meeting a map, I'm going to be like, hey guys, give me some feedback. So yeah, thank you so much. This was just wonderful. And yeah, thanks for everybody for attending. And we will hopefully see you at the next Mugs and Mornings and at the next quarterly meeting. Have a great one.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Have fun with
Bye.
your
Bye.
30-day
Thank you, everyone.
challenge.
Yeah.
Bye.